Hey guys, welcome to Nerdarchy, for nerds, by nerds. I'm Ted, hanging out with some of the colleagues here.
Dave.
Nate.
And today we got a player tip for you, and that's creating a backstory that your GM can use. So, it's probably, a short and sweet kind of thing. When you're working on your backstory, you want to have enough open-ended, story or information that the DM, GM can weave into his campaign or story arc.
When you're doing speaking or telling stories, there's something called an open loop. When you create your backstory, you want to put in as many open loops as possible, because if you close all the loops, right, if they're completed stories, there's less for your GM to work with. You want to be able to use player agency to add to the world and make things creative. At the same time, you want your GM to be able to look at your backstory and go, oh, wait a minute, there's like 2-3 different plot lines I can weave right into my own story, right from my players. When I did my session 0, the group I'm working with now, I took like 2-3 pages of notes based off of player backstories. They would tell me something about their backstory, like, and it could be simple as the background, right? I had a player go, well, my character's a gladiator. He used to be a slave. So like, oh, really? Well, how did that happen? Well, my Dragonborn tribe was wiped out, and I was the last survivor, and they took me prisoner, and I was sold into slavery to a tiefling who then used me in gladiatorial arena, and from there we were able to build off of that.
Mm-hmm. So I think there's a lot of very cool things. A couple characters that I recently did. I made a ranger rogue who, his background is sailor. There's not really a whole lot there, just as is. But his parents were murdered, so that's open. He's looking for that. He was a sailor, and he worked on any vessel that needed him or would be willing to hire him. So I told the DM, well, I worked with criminals, I worked with people hunting criminals, I worked on merchant caravans, so any of that, was like, oh well, anytime the DM needs to throw a contact in anywhere that's near a port city, oh yeah, this guy, you worked with him, or you worked for him, such and such, easily able to be done. My character for Dave's Underdark campaign, he's a deep gnome bard who has done fights, has thrown fights, so all of that has worked into his backstory. Well, if somebody happens to have caught on that he's thrown some fights, well, now there's some conflict if that information happens to be able to get out there, and there could be people like, well, I lost money because you looked, superior, but you lost the fight, so now I'm gonna come after you. He, was from, the Deep Gnome City, and there's all the connections he could have through there. So there's plenty of information that I've given to the DM to say, all right, do with as you will. And, whatever winds up, coming about because of what his story, fits, all the better.
Hooks. It's all about having hooks in there, right? You're running towards something. You're running away from something.
Yes.
You're trying to find something that was lost. You're trying to lose something that was found.
Yeah, and they've still got to have that edge to them, because like you said, the open loop rather than the closed loop. If you've got a guy like, let's say you're really good friends with your uncle and he raised you, but your uncle's like kind of off in some ways. Maybe he's a wizard and he's kind of strange, or just like estranged in some way from him. So you're like, okay, well, I'll talk to you later sometime. I'm gonna move over here. Crazy person. Well, so he disappears at some point, and then you get a package in the mail, and it's this rock that's warm to the touch, and you're like, this is weird. It's just a trinket, in the 5th edition perspective, but it's something from your uncle. Your uncle's disappeared, you lost contact with him, and now you've got this thing that's been delivered to you, and he says, be careful, don't let anybody else know that you've got this. And because that's all like you didn't say your uncle's dead. You didn't say that he's like this or that. He could be anything.
He didn't tell you what the rock is, other than don't let the wrong person get it.
And who's the wrong person? He doesn't tell you.
And this doesn't require like a 4-page dissertation on your character's background.
This is a couple paragraphs.
Yeah, you like the trap of writing too much background is then you're locked into that, into that story where maybe you want to let a lot of it come out.
Yeah, I was purposely vague with all those steps.
You come up with a couple hooks, or you can have a purpose. You can have a fleshed out backstory too. Like they both work, but just know the more you flesh it out, the more you're kind of locking in your character's personality and what he's like. I mean, Uthengar, my dwarven wizard, basically, comes from a clan of dwarven wizards, and they're each charged at a certain age with the mission of going out, finding more lure, and bringing it back to the hold. I tied that into his trinket, which was a book that would hold no ink.
Right.
And he spent the last 10 years filling a book with magical lore and secrets to bring back to his hold. Right. Now he was a first level wizard. Like you could be like, oh, there's no way you could do that. You're first level. But it's the story. It doesn't matter. It's in a book that basically got erased, and I weaved into the story that the reason why that happened was he was cursed when he stopped this evil warlock, or someone he perceived to be a warlock, from trying to steal a baby. And then when the guy was being hauled away by the town guards, this guy threw a curse at him, and then he thinks nothing of it, just mutterings of this crazy old guy. He stopped the baby. He goes back to his hold, presents the book, and it's blank.
This is kind of a joke, right? Where's the real book?
Yeah. So the hooks are needs to break. In my mind, the trinket is now a cursed book that he has to break the curse on. In order to unlock the information that's already there. 2, the guy disappeared, the warlock, so he had to find him. 3, why was he trying to steal the baby? So there's these open loops that are in there for the DM to go, oh, okay, either he could make them individual plots, work them into an existing plot, or maybe that's what sparks, ideas for the campaign. When you add backstory with these kinds of open loops, that's what you're doing. You're giving your DM fodder to make plot hooks that you're going to want to explore because you made them. Instead of the DM having to come up with something and figure out how to fit you guys in.
And it's separate from character goals. Like you can have you as a player can have a character goal, and the character itself can have a character goal. This specific thing is designed as what you have written for your backstory is pre-written information that the GM is going to be able to link into his game to make it more real, make your character fit into an existing world as opposed to you being apart from it with just I'm a cookie cutter character going through this pre-written story.
I would say they're separate in a certain way, but character goals and background are really linked.
They can be.
They're linked in a fashion.
No. Ted's saying player goals and character goals. 2 different things.
Sorry.
Example.
So you, Ted, have goals for your character.
The best example, easiest one. Warlock, Fiend Patron, character, get soul back. Player, stay a warlock. They're at odds. You know what I mean? Like you don't want to lose your warlock powers, but your character doesn't want his soul to be taken for eternity. So from what Ted was saying,
I was confused on what you meant. But.
And those goals then become become part of your backstory, and they become fodder for the DM, and they give the player something to work with, the DM something to work with, and it helps define your character.
Yeah, absolutely.
But the character itself, their goals can be derived directly from the background. Yes. Or you can say, I want a character that's played a certain way. What happened
to make him that way? Yes.
Beforehand to make him that way. So you can start with one. Just remember filling the other.
Yeah, and like we said, a couple sentences in the beginning. If you don't want to do pages and pages, you don't have to. Your DM probably doesn't want to read it anyway.
Well, it's better to not do pages and pages. Unless you want to write a book. Write a book if you want to write a book.
I mean, come on. We've all DM'd and we've all had those cat players. They hand you the backstory and it's like 3 pages long. And you're like, what do you want me to do with this? Why don't you get a highlighter and mark the important parts?
Oh, how about I just read it to you?
Yeah.
I know I
Don't
personally.
worry your eyes.
I know I've personally done, an incredibly long backstory. Nowadays, I'm looking at anywhere from like 3 to 5 paragraphs tops, just because I want to give information out to show that I've really thought out the character. I want to give information that the DM is going to be able to weave into their story as much or as little as they like, because you're not going to give them, oh yeah, make the campaign about me, because that's not. No GM wants a player that's expecting that, unless that's the premise. Yeah.
Well, the other thing too is your backstory can actually become partially campaign world building as well, because if you do, especially in a session 0, when you put out ideas for your backstory, your DM like, oh, okay, well, is that because it's you, or is that because that's how your people, tribe, race, whatever, it's town, city, where you're from, they're like that, So like, there's a lot of agency there. Like if you're from a people that are horse nomads, then that means there has to be horse nomads somewhere in the world,
Right.
Mm-hmm. So there's also that where your backstory can actually inform upon the campaign world, if you have an open-minded DM that's willing to let you do that.
Right.
I like it when my players come up with agency. In my one game, I have the Gobelos. So in order for the Gobelos, which they're entertainers and clowning is their thing, well, where did they clown? They had to be part of something in order to be clown, some kind of show or something. Which from that we came up with a monstrous circus, where they all got murdered.
Right.
And they were the only ones to survive, which later came back in the story as
Zombies.
as a zombie undead circus, posing as the normal people with different ringleaders and stuff. So, their backstory kind of fed into a later mini adventure.
Right.
And that's what you always want. In the one arc right now, the Dragonborn, their sole purpose was really to get home. Well, they got home. Well, and then when they got home, what does that lead to? It leads to something completely different. So these things can build and can grow. So I don't know, guys, make some backstory. A couple sentences. If you get your DM involved in your characters, talk to them. And the best backstories usually involve a little back and forth between the player and the DM, because and here's the thing, like I tend to I'm willing to give more on certain things if I think it's a really cool idea and I like it. So you get me invested as a player.
And if it excites the player more to play that thing they came up with, and you're like, oh yeah, sure, we can go with that. That's cool. Well, especially if it's going to make you being more invested as the player.
I mean, you kind of did something like along that lines in your game, and just completely kind of made up a new sorcerer origin.
Yes. Yeah. She didn't know what she wanted to play, but we came around to.
Is she in Azamar?
Mm-hmm.
She's in Azamar. She wanted to be a sorcerer, and you're like, well, how about the angelic origin, or whatever you decide, celestial. Whatever,
and I just reskinned the dragon thing, and I'm giving her access to some of the sacred flame and some of the radiant damage things to kind of go along with that.
With the theme.
Yeah, with the theme.
Cool. Nice.
And she'll eventually get angel wings, so that's pretty cool. So
who doesn't want angel wings?
Yeah, exactly.
It's really just the draconic, just with a couple twists.
Yeah, it's a reskin with a little bit of twist, a few extra spells. I gave her access to choose the radiant spells. I didn't give her excess spells. So,
although now looking at Storm Sorcerer, perhaps you should have.
Yeah, but now I can just tack them on.
Now you just tack.
You're like, here, have these things.
Yeah. So that's just an example of how investing a little time into your character's backstory can sway the DM to do more interesting things, even mechanically, in the game, in your favor.
My Ranger Rogues, the DM liked my story. It's like, well, I need a, she was thinking like, okay, well, what reason do I have for your parents being murdered? So she's like, well, all right, well, in that world, they had airships as well. So she's like, well, your family is known for captaining or whatnot airships, so I'm going to give you vehicles air as a bonus proficiency, because your family was known for that, and your family was killed because they refused to give someone passage. And it's like, well, by me coming up with a story, I wound up with another vehicle proficiency.
Right, and from that, like, then you have the question of, like, well, why did they refuse passage? Where were they trying to go? Why were they so desperate they're willing to kill to get where they're going? Or she could have just said, left it as they were killed and you don't know why.
Mm-hmm.
And make you uncover piece by piece.
I think that's more player knowledge versus character knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
Like, she gave me information that I'm not certain whether my character knows it yet. I've been hunting for years for information. We've only had one session, but the characters are starting off at level 10. So there's some information that I've uncovered, and I need to figure out what all the pieces are. But that's the information that she's told me as the player.
Yeah, so. You could even something could have really cool could have been done, like creating that scene where because like you're invested as the player and as the DM, you came up with a story, and maybe the DM goes back and says this is what happened. These mysterious people board your family ship, and there's an argument between your father and the leader of this group, and your mother comes over, and all of a sudden, whether they draw blades or cast spells, your mother explodes in a spray of blood, and your father's like horrified, and he's backing away, trying to get away because they're now after him. Maybe he's unarmed or unprepared. He might not even be a warrior. Mm-hmm. And the only thing left is his crew and his son. So perhaps like he runs to his son, puts something in your hand as he pushes you over the side, right? Like it's a feather token or something, and he's really saving your life. But the last thing you see is the sword that bursts through his chest, as you're falling away to safety. And maybe that sword is the only thing you really remember.
Oh yeah,
what
like
happened.
maybe it's a particular color, or it's got some kind of runes
or markings on it, or you see the hand, on the hilt that has 6 fingers.
A 6-fingered man.
So these are just examples, and we could ramble on with examples forever and ever. But really, you just open loops. Come up with things that you don't really need the answer to. You can fill them in later. Your DM can fill them in later. However you like, whenever you can, get your DM on board and help with the backstory. Like, I want to do this thing. Where would that be in your world? I was playing a human sailor with the as like a Viking or barbarian, and he was like a Viking. I'm like, well, where would like these raider types be? And the DM's like, oh, you'd be from here. This is what your people would be, So, and this is kind of like the physical characteristics. So, you can go back and forth with your DM on these things and help build it out.
So what do you guys think out there at home? Do you have anything to talk about the open loop and backstory information? Go ahead and put it in the comments below. While you're doing that, feel free to click like, share, even subscribe.
You can patronize us in a good way over on Patreon.
Also check the articles over at nerdarchy.com.
So until next time, stay nerdy.